Hey friends, welcome to another live lesson with the Jelly Roll Club. It is 7:59 and we're going to get started at the top of the hour. If you would go ahead and open the chat and share your name so I know who's out there, that would be great. So today is lesson 4 of the summer sampler. We have a total of 12 blocks that we're going to be making together, and then we're going to have some supplemental lessons afterwards. So if you will drop your name, that way I know who's with us on this live lesson tonight on a Sunday. All right, friends. So what's on the agenda tonight? So tonight is block 4. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about is picking out fabric, because picking out fabric is not an easy thing for some people. If you've been quilting for a long time, or if you've been quilting just 2 days, picking out fabric seems to be one of those things that quilters struggle from time to time. So we're going to talk about picking out fabric tonight. I'm going to talk about an alternative to the basket block in case you don't like it. And then we're going to make our block together. And so I have Joy from Canada. We have Carolyn. We have Sonia and a couple of other people that I'm sure will let us know their names in just a minute. Hi, friends. Super excited tonight. Okay, what's on the agenda? So you should have seen on the website pattern for block number 4. It looks like this. It's a basket with a green border. If you don't like this basket, guess what? You don't have to make this basket. One of the things that I have posted on the website, it's at the bottom of all of the blocks, where all the blocks are listed, and our website is www.jellyrollclub.com. If you go to the website, there are tabs across the top, and there's one that says Summer Sampler. Hi, Mary from Indiana. There are alternative blocks on the website. So if you don't like a block that we're making, so if you decide that a basket block is not for you, maybe it looks too homely and it's not your cup of tea, there are 25 other options for half square triangles that you could make. And if you notice, all of these blocks use a variety of colors. So there's 25 other layouts that go with the summer sampler. And that's true if you want to make your quilt bigger. So you can print this out and you can take the remainder of your jelly roll. The only thing you need to make all of these blocks right here is one strip of color and one strip of background. You sew 2 seams all the way down. You use the strip tube method that we've been doing, and you can make all of these blocks. These blocks are also a great way to use up all of the little leftovers, because whenever we make a block, we always have a few of these left over. And so I save these like in a little baggie, and you can use those to make additional blocks, or you can use these to make just a whole new quilt. And so these are some of mine, and I'm using these to make a half square triangle quilt that's going to be all 4 patches in different colors. And so save those. Also save the little ends. So whenever we trim our blocks, we always end up with this little thing on the end that we start with. And when you have that, you can take 2 of those, and if you open them up and you square them up and you put these together, you can make hourglass blocks. And so if you have one of these on the end and another one of those, you can end up with cute little hourglass blocks like this that you can trim up. And that is my favorite way to save all of my scraps. I turn them into little blocks, and then these can be bonus quilts, table runners, mug rugs, tote bags, anything that you want to do. So never waste your little teeny tiny bits, because I love making bonus quilts with my leftover scraps. And so save every last drop. I put mine in a little bag, and that way whenever I'm making my blocks, I have extra things that I can pull from. So I save even the teeny tiniest triangles. So save them all, my friends. Never waste a jelly roll strip. And so we have Chris from Iowa. We have Julie from Ohio. Welcome. Welcome, Mary. And of course, my friend Lynn is out there. Hey, Lynn. All right, friends, let's talk about our block. So let's get started. So I'm going to move some of this thing, some of these things aside, and I'm going to get my block. So I decided, went a little crazy. I'm a jelly roll crazy lady and I love jelly rolls, but I decided to go ahead and make my quilt in 2 colorways, not just one. And I'll show you what I've got. So when we started, we made block 1, which was this block right here. You saw me make it live. But then I decided that I wanted to also check it out to see what it would look like in batiks. So I've made every block in duplicate. And so one quilt is going to be for me and one quilt is going to be for my granddaughter. And so this quilt looks really great in every colorway. The same thing happened with my star. So I made this star with leftovers and it had a white middle, but then I decided to also make the star in a deep blue indigo batik. And I love how these turned out. Block 9 and 10 won't print. I haven't loaded those yet, Chris. These are block 3, so we made those last time. So this is my pastel version and this is my batik version. And so now we are up to block 4. Block 4 is the basket. I went ahead and made it in batiks. And so this is what the basket block looks like. It does sit at an angle like this. And like I said, if you do not want to make this block, you don't have to. You can make an alternative block. And I put these linked already in the classroom. So if you want to use one of these optional blocks, that's perfectly fine. You don't have to make the block we're making tonight. All right. So let's get started. All right, I'm going to rotate the camera down so you can see the block that I have in front of me. So I'm going to mark this down, and here's the block that we have tonight. It's a little bit different than some of the other blocks that we've been doing because it is built in sections. So let's look at those sections. I'm going to get a ruler and I'm going to show you what those sections are. One section of this block is this row over here on the right. And so this is a row. It's the bottom of the basket. And so this is an entire row right here. So we put together a 2.5-inch square, a 2.5-inch half square triangle, and a 4.5. So this is 4.5 inches. This one is 2.5. And then this one is a 2.5-inch half square triangle. And so let's mark this off so that you can see. And if you want to draw on yours, you can. And so that's what that looks like. So when I put it together, I'm going to have that 4.5-inch rectangle, a 2.5-inch half square triangle, and a 2.5-inch square. And I will build that strip set, that row right there. The next row that I have to build is this row right here. And this row will get built with a 4.5-inch rectangle. So this is 4.5 inches, right? A 2.5-inch half square triangle. We're going to do an easy corner. So this is an EC. So it's an easy corner and a 2.5-inch half square triangle. So this is a half square triangle here, a half square triangle here, a half square triangle here. And so this one is a little bit different. And so this builds this section of the block, right? So then we have all of this over here. So we're going to build this block in 2 halves. We're going to have half 1 and half 2. Half 2 involves 6 half square triangles and a 4.5-inch rectangle. And so when we build this block, we're going to sew 2 across, and then we're going to add this to the bottom. When we build this one, we're going to build it as a row, and then we're going to join these 2 halves together. Does that make sense? Hi, Lorraine. Lorraine from Florida is with us, and then Anita from South Carolina. So this is how we're going to build this block today. So you're going to need a 4.5-inch rectangle for here. You're going to need a 4.5-inch rectangle for here and one for here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start cutting. So if you will grab your jelly roll strips, you can go ahead and start cutting. And let me show you what my selections are. Picking fabric is some of the hardest things that you can do because your block can end up looking really cute, or it can end up looking like an unmitigated disaster. And so one of the things that you're going to want to do is not mix too many prints together. And I'm going to show you a horrifying disaster. Yes, we all have them. And so we have Paula from Ontario. Hi, Paula. So let me show you what I call an unmitigated disaster. I was quilting along and I wasn't paying attention. I was talking on the phone with family. And next thing you know, I stitched my block incorrectly and I wasn't paying attention. And the next thing you know, my block looked like an unmitigated disaster. So here's my disaster block. Wah, wah, wah. Terrible. Look at this block. All of this busyness going on, that wild print, too much stuff. This is probably going to end up being a free motion quilting practice block or somebody's mug rug, maybe mine. But this is what the block looks like when I did it correctly. So I was paying attention to my scale of print, and I like this a whole lot better because if you notice, this border is not competing with my basket. It's a lot softer green. The print is more subtle, and it actually makes the basket pop. So color really matters. Look, block A, block B. This is a mess. Don't do this. This is a total mess. So when you're picking out fabrics for your blocks, pick out fabrics that have a variety of scale and that the scale of the fabric will allow your block to look nice and attractive. So my pastel version, these are some of my options. I have this small scale green right here. I have this basket weave print that I could use for my basket itself. I have this orange that's like a medium scale print. And then I have two different yellows. Because these are all kind of busy and similar, what I want to do is I want to try to choose a variety of scale. For my outside green, I'm going to choose this muted green with little tiny flowers. I think that will allow my basket to shine adequately without competing with my basket. And then I will select another color. So for the little, I call them eggs, you can pick different prints, different pastels, or you can make them all the same like I did in my basket that I did in sample one. So in sample one, all of these were the same color. And I like how that turned out. That bright yellow brings out that gold in that black down there. And so I like how this basket turned out. So you can make them all the same, or you can make them all different. The choice is yours. So I'm going to pick this green for the outside. I'm going to pick this yellow for the little eggs in the basket. And then I'm going to pick this brown that has these little yellow flowers. And so by picking these three colors and laying them next to each other, I think that they do a nice job of working together without competing with one another. And I'm also, of course, going to add a little bit of my tone-on-tone background. So this is my choice for my basket. I'm going to use yellow for my eggs, green for my outside, brown for my basket, and my background. So now I'm ready to start cutting. All right, so here we go. So let's cut this basket block and let's get started. So like I said, the first thing that we're going to do, I'm going to set my background aside because I don't need it right now, and my border. And I'm going to focus on this section of my basket. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut all of the pieces that go with my basket. So I'm going to need for my basket if you notice, 1, 2, 3 half square triangles that are basket fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and cut those right now. So I'm going to do a 7-inch section of basket. And so I'm going to get my ruler and I'm going to cut myself. I'm going to leave it 1 inch hanging over. This is a 6.5-inch ruler. I'm just going to cut myself a little 7-inch segment. And so I'm going to use that for the 3 small half square triangles on my basket. I'm also going to need to cut this rectangle right here that I'm going to do with an easy corner. So I need a 4.5-inch section for my basket. So I'm just going to use this ruler. I always use the lines on my ruler and not the lines on my board to cut. Some people will use the lines on their board, but that ends up being a little bit inaccurate sometimes. So I will use the lines on my ruler. And so that is 4.5 inches on this end. I will line it up so that I have a nice 90-degree line. The more accurate you're cutting, the more accurate your block. And if you notice, I am cutting only one layer, and I use a little rotary cutter when I'm cutting single layers. If I were cutting more layers, I would use a 45 millimeter. So this is if I'm cutting 2 or 3 layers, and if I'm cutting 4 layers or more, I use my giant. But for a lot of the stuff that I do, I just use this little small one. I have better control, and it's safer for me. But that's a personal preference. So, larger one, you're going to sew background to this. So I'm going to take a little piece of background. I'm going to lay it right on top. I don't have to be too fussy. I can just take a scissor. I'm going to press this. This has a crease in it, and I'm not happy with that. So before I sew it, I'm going to go ahead and give it a little press. I do not starch my pre-cuts at all. If you buy nice high quality fabrics, they tend to be nice and thick, and you don't need to cut them or too much or starch them. You got to be careful with your fabrics that you buy in pre-cut though, because sometimes they have pinked edges, and then sometimes they're not exactly 2.5 inches. So it's a good idea whenever you get pre-cuts that you didn't cut yourself to always double check them to make sure that they're 2.5. And when I'm checking this, this is 2.5. But see my little pinked edge that hangs over? So this one is a tiny bit bigger than 2.5. And that happens sometimes. Sometimes the strips have great big wide pinked edges. Like this one had a great big wide pinked edge. And these were actually not 2.5. They were a little bit less. They were almost 2.25. So you've really got to be careful when you're working with pre-cuts, especially if they're not name brand, because they may not be exactly 2.5 inches. Okay, so I have a 4.5 inch rectangle, and I have this that I'm going to sew on both sides. And so I'm going to go ahead and set that aside because I have my basket fabric. And when I use a pattern, I usually like to check it off. That way I know what I have. So I know that I've already cut out this, and I've cut out this, and I've got this rectangle. So I've cut out these 3 pieces, and I'm just going to mark them that way so that I can keep track of what's going on and make sure I have enough pieces. I need 2 background rectangles here that are 4.5 inches and 4.5 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to cut 2 background pieces. I can just fold this in half. I can use my ruler here, give it a little press because this one is super wrinkly. Don't like wrinkly anything. I always press my jelly roll strips. And I love my little wool pressing mat. I don't use steam because steam can migrate through that mat and it can warp. If you notice, my board is a little bit warped. I didn't know that when I first started using that. And I actually steamed it on top of here, and it warped my Fiskars board. So I need a 4.5 inch piece. So I'm going to trim 4.5 and 4.5. I'm going to lay that over here. I'm going to chop my little friend off. And I'm going to rotate my ruler so that, rotate my piece so that I'm cutting 4.5 inches. And I'm going to lay this down. Line it up so that I have a perfect 90-degree angle. And that bottom edge is running across here. And that's what makes those pieces match up nicely. So accurate cutting and that 1/4 inch seam are what get you to where you want. So those are my 2 backgrounds. And so I'm going to go ahead and check them off because this one has a lot of pieces. I need a 2.5-inch square, so I'll cut that next. And I'm going to need a 2.5-inch square for an easy corner. So I'm going to cut that 2.5-inch square like this, line it up with my 2.5-inch line on both sides. And I'm going to cut 2 of those. How's it going, everyone? Are you following along? There's a lot of stuff to cut on this block. All right, 2 of those. So now I'm going to mark where those 2 go, and I'm going to move those aside. And one of those 2.5-inch squares is going to go on my easy corner up here. And the other one is going to go on the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and mark. And I'm using a pencil that can be used for marking on quilt. So it's a special quilt pencil. So it's a Quilter's Clean Erase. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mark a line on the diagonal from corner to corner. So I'm going to mark that diagonal. Just like that. And that is going to be the line that we're going to stitch. And we're not going to stitch right directly on top of that line. We're going to stitch just to the right of it. And I'm going to talk to you about that why when we start putting this together. But there they are. I have easy corner pieces. I have basket pieces. And I need to look. So I have easy corner piece, bottom piece. I have all that done. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 half square triangles that I need to make. In order to make 6 half square triangles, I'm going to need to use about 12 inches, maybe a little bit more. Just to be generous, I'm going to make it 14 inches from my jelly roll strip to make sure that I have enough. If you want to give yourself a little wiggle room, you can. If you want to do the entire strip, you can. And so I'm just going to cut a section of strip. I'm going to make mine a little bit longer, and I'm going to cut enough that I can put that with my background and make a strip tube. So this is going to be a strip tube, and this is going to be a strip tube right here. So I have 1 strip tube and 2 strip tubes. All right. So I'm going to give you a minute to get all that cut out. And I'm going to give you a chance to ask me any questions. So hi, Bettina. Hi, everybody. Does anybody have any questions you want to ask while I'm pressing this and getting these ready to sew? If you have not emailed me your beautiful basket block or any of the other blocks, block 1, block 2, or block 3, please email those to me. My email is Yvonne, so IVONNE, at jellyrollclub.com. It's all one word. You can email me your blocks. You can send them to me on Messenger. You can send them to me through Facebook. And I would be so happy to post them on our Jelly Roll Club website. I love looking at everyone's beautiful blocks and seeing what everybody is doing in the summer sampler. And all the blocks are so different. Some people are doing them in jewel tones. Other people are in rich, dark batiks. And I just absolutely love looking at everyone's wonderful work. All right, so we have all of that stuff here, and we are ready to start sewing. So let's look at what we've got, right? So let me show you what you should have again. Okay, so let's show you what you've got. So you have 1 strip, right, of, this is the egg fabric with background. And we're going to sew that right sides together, 1/4 of an inch on both sides. So that's 1, right? Number 2, you're going to have a small strip tube that's about 8 inches. and you're going to put that right sides together. So this is 8 inches. And you're going to sew that 1/4 of an inch on both sides. You're going to have 2 2.5 inch squares, one with a line drawn and one without. And you're going to have 2 pieces of background that are 4.5 inches and 1 piece of basket fabric that's 4.5 inches. Okay? And so we start with all 2.5 inch strips, and I will lay this here so that you can see. So now I can go ahead and I can come in here and I can cross this out. So now I have enough for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 half square triangles. And these are all the units in here that go in section 1 right here are going to be 2.5 inch squares. So all these little half square triangles, I'm going to sew them and square them up to 2.5 inches square. So let's get started sewing, okay? All right, so this is going to be all sewn in sections, so let's go ahead and start sewing. The first thing that I'm going to want to sew, and please excuse me if my machine is loud, it's a mechanical machine, so it is super loud. It's not like those electronic machines that are not loud at all. And so I'm just going to sew 1/4 inch on both sides. And I hope you're sewing along with me. The point of all of these lessons is so that you and I can sew together. And then when we are done, you are ready to go, just like I am. So there's one section. I'm going to sew my next one 1/4 of an inch on either side of this strip. This is my longer strip. And this is for my eggs. So these are the little eggs that are in the basket. Although I'm not sure what chicken laid those eggs because they're triangular shape and that would be painful if you were a mama chicken having eggs that were triangular shape. Quilting is a wonderful hobby to get into because it activates both hemispheres of the brain. Anytime that you can do an activity that activates both hemispheres of the brain, for example, the analytical side, logical side, and the creative side, then that kind of brain activity, which is often seen in things like playing music or learning a new skill, those are all of the things that keep your brain healthy as you age. So exercise, good nutrition, and quilting are essential to having a healthy lifestyle. So if anybody wants to give you a hard time about quilting, you just tell them that it's a brain-based activity and it's keeping your brain healthy. There's no doubt that quilting is a thinking task. It really helps you to think about everything. All right, so I've got that sewn. And I'm ready to start cutting, okay? So I'm gonna pull a little piece of fabric in there and I use my leader and ender to taper that off. I never just break my thread and I don't use my thread cutter, so. All right. So let's rotate down so you can watch me cut my blocks, okay? My block pieces. So here we go. From that long strip, I'm going to cut out my egg pieces. So that's the first thing that I'm going to do, and I'm going to set those aside. I'm going to use my ruler. Just like this, you've done this before. I'm going to square those up. So I'm going to lay that 45-degree line. This is the selvage. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to lay that right on my stitching line. And I'm going to make one cut off the end. And this is the part that I saved to make those little tiny hourglass blocks. I just pop that open. And so this right here, you combine two of these together and you can make cute little hourglass blocks. My next cut, I'm going to slide my ruler straight down, and I don't know if you can see that. And I'm going to get to where that stitching is, and I've stitched with gray thread so you can see it, right? My 45-degree line keeps my angle straight, and I'm going to slide that over until, and I'm going to zoom down so you can see that, to the 45-degree line is either right on the stitch line or right on the edge and barely kissing that stitch line on the top. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut from this end to that end. And what that does is when I pull this off, it gives me a little generous half square triangle that I can trim up and make that perfect. It's actually pretty nice right now, but it's going to be super crisp and super perfect, because whenever you're working with a bias, your little square, your half square triangle can get a little bit distorted. And so that gives you plenty of trimming room. And so I'm going to need enough for my basket. I need 6 of these. So I'm cutting 6. Joy forgets to eat when you quilt. I do too. So quilting is good for my health because it keeps me thinner. Normally, I love to eat, and I will eat all the time. But when I'm quilting, I do forget to eat, which is good for me, and so it keeps me slimmer. So in some ways, quilting is very healthy for me. Have you seen another quilter? She says, quilting is my therapy. I totally agree. I like to drink Diet Cokes and listen to Bob Seger when I quilt. So I like a little bit of relaxing music, sometimes a little bit of jazzy music, and I just really love doing that. Listening to music while I quilt, it's probably one of the most relaxing things that you can do. And sometimes I get going so fast, especially when I'm singing something I really like. So now I have 4, and I'm going to get 5 and 6 out of here, and I'm going to have a little bit left over, and I'm going to go ahead and cut that one. I'm going to slide that down. Like I said, you don't have to have a ton of fancy rulers. A 6.5-inch one is a great one for this task. There's a little groove in my board here, and that happens. Over time, you get little grooves. If you notice, mine is well worn. This has been used and loved a lot. But you still keep using it. I love buying Fiskars because they have a lifetime warranty on their cutters and other things. So if you can buy good quality, it's better to have less tools and high quality tools than a bunch of junky ones. So 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I have 6 of these, and I'm going to set them aside. I have this little tail left. So I'm going to go ahead and cut another half square triangle out of here, and then I'm going to put it in my bag. So remember, you're always lining that up with this edge with the tip of the stitching, and that with the stitch line or the bottom, and that gives you perfect half square triangles. So there's my extra, and I'm going to put these in my little baggie where I'm keeping track of all my little bits that are left over from this project. And I go ahead and I put them away. And that way they don't get lost in the jungle that can become your sewing room. All right. So we have 6 eggs. Yours can be all the same, different colors. It doesn't matter. You're going to press them all, but I'll wait just a second. And now we're going to do our easy corner, right? So we have a couple more things to build. So we have this section right here, right? And this has an easy corner. The most important part about an easy corner is having it face you. So put the pattern so that it's facing the direction it's going to go, and then lay your piece on there, because you can get angrily challenged with this, and make sure that that half square triangle that you drew when you put it down, because you should have drawn on the wrong side, so not the right side, is facing the correct direction, and that angle is going up. So for me, that angle is going up. And sometimes when you're on camera, it can go the wrong way. And so I'm going up the hill. So here's the little bottom part, and I'm going up that hill. Now, a lot of people, and I'm going to show you this, will tell you to sew directly on that drawn line. I never do, and I'll tell you why. I fold the direction that this is going to go. So I know that my easy corner, right, is going to go like this. When I fold this down, my easy corner will look like this. And I go ahead and I kind of finger press it with my finger. And I lay it down the way it's supposed to lay, just so that I can get a visual. So that's going to be what my easy corner looks like. And let me rotate this down and point to where you're going to sew. So let me show you. So this is my little easy corner, right? And I always lay it down so where I can visualize it, because I don't want to cut it in the wrong direction or sew it in the wrong direction. So it's going to go like this, just like that. And that's going to match that angle. So then I'm going to rotate this back. And I know that the side that I'm going to cut off now is this side over here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mark that, a little tiny mark, because I know that that's the side that I'm going to cut away. And the reason I do that is so that I don't get confused and cut it on the wrong side. Okay, so here's my drawn line, and I'll tell you why I never sew directly on that drawn line. So I'm going to lay this down. And this is a water-soluble pencil. I'm going to go ahead and mark right here. I'm going to use this one. And I'm going to go ahead and mark. Okay. When I sew, I will sew just to the outside of that drawn line. So I am not going to sew directly on top, because what happens when I fold this fabric back, I'm going to lose almost 1/16 of an inch in that seam. And if I sew straight on that drawn line, it will be inaccurate. So I'm going to go over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew it so that you can see what that looks like. And don't start sewing on this corner, start sewing down here. All right, friends, my machine went cattywampus on me, and that happens to us all. So it's going to take me just a second. So if you'll give me just a second, I'm going to get this rethreaded. All right. So anyway, my machine went crazy. So I had to rethread it and restitch that line. All right. So here's my little easy corner. And you can see where my machine went crazy and the thread broke. I don't know what was going on. But I sewed just to the right of that. Why? Because when I flip this open and I press it down, that corner will be a lot more exact and I can trim it. And so this one went off, veered off to the corner, but I just want that to be just to the right of that line. And I'm going to fix that. And that happens sometimes. All of a sudden we're sewing along and our machine goes zoop and it zooms off in the wrong direction because we're going a little bit fast. And that happens. And it just takes a second to fix it. So let's go ahead and fix it. And here we are. Never be afraid of mistakes in quilting. They can all be fixed. Okay. So now I have this block. And when I fold it back, if you notice, there's a little bit of a hump. I'm going to take and I'm going to finger press that. But because I stitched to the outside of that, when I take and I measure that with my ruler, I'm going to lay this ruler on here and I'm going to measure that. That is 4.5 inches, just a little bit bigger than 4.5 inches. I'm going to press that and I'm going to square that up and that'll end up being a perfect match for my corner. And so by sewing, not directly on that line, but just a little bit to the right when I made this unit, that easy corner made sure that I can trim that up exactly to 4.5 inches. And so that's what that piece looks like when it goes in there. All right, so that's one of my easy corners. So I have this. I have 6 eggs. I have 1 easy corner. I have 2 of these, and I need to make 2 half square triangles. That's my next 2 pieces I have to make, and those are just regular, just like we did everything else. I'm going to cut those out, and then this basket block is almost ready for me to put together. All right. Does anybody have any quilting jokes that they want to tell in the chat? I love jokes. Have you guys seen the one about the singer-songwriters? Somebody walked in a bar and he was a singer-songwriter. I was like, oh, that's cute. So I love jokes, especially quilting jokes. There's a little character called Mrs. Bobbins, and she has a lot of quilt funnies. I love them. One of them is don't give her any fabric. Don't give her any money. She's just going to buy fabric. And that's true of me too. So don't give me any unless you want me to spend it on fabric. True story. True story. Okay, so I need to get at least 2 out of this. Here. And so I've got 1. I'm getting my other one. I'll give it a swivel trim. I'm going to make sure that I have that on the line. Again, matching it up with that thread. And I'm going to save what's left. So I'm going to save that little tail. Get it out of my way because otherwise my sewing area turns into a mess. And so I'm trying to stay organized. Staying organized is the hardest thing when you're working with jelly rolls. Okay, So how's everybody going? Give me a thumbs up, give me a yes. Let me know when you are ready to move on. The next thing that I want you to do now that we have all of these pieces is square all of these up to 2.5 inches. So I'm going to press all of these, square them up to 2.5 inches, and then we are ready to assemble this block in sections. So let's get started pressing and squaring up, and we're going to have this block finished in no time flat. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, so let me rotate this down. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make that as flat as possible. I'm just going to lay my iron down, trying not to distort my block. That should measure 4.5 inches. This time I'm going to pin. Normally I don't pin, but this time I'm going to pin, and I'm going to check every one for square. So I'm going to use this little tiny cutting mat that I got from the Dollar Tree for $1, friends. I got this little cutting mat for $1. I was so excited because it fits right on my wool pressing mat. And now I can check it to make sure that it's square. This is a little bit, needs a little bit of a trim. And so I'm just going to check it that it's 4.5 inches. So I'm going to use this ruler that has a 4.5 inch line. And so this is 4.5 inches. If I trim any excess, it's going to be off of this bottom, not off of the easy corner. So I'm going to line it up like this, 4.5 inches. I'm going to make sure that it's nice and square and straight. And I'm going to rotate this to this side. And I'm going to make sure that it's 2.5 inches wide. So I'm just double checking this entire block. I have a tiny sliver off of here that I need to take off from making that easy corner, but that's all that I've had to do. And this is now 4.5 inches long by 2.5 inches wide. And that's one of my basket pieces. So make sure that you have that ready to go. So there's one. And now I'm going to make sure that I trim all of my other pieces and get them ready. So I'm going to press them all, and then I'm going to trim them. So I'm going to press 100% of my blocks. And I press them to set this seam that shrinks the stitching. And I'm going to press all of these to the dark side. In this case, it's the yellow. So I'm just going to run my finger across there, lay the iron on top. I'm not scrubbing, I'm just letting the iron do the work. And I'm going to set that aside. Some people will use a clapper. You can just use your hand like this. The heat from your hand will transmit back into the piece. And so you don't have to have a lot of fancy sewing tools. There's a million ways that you could spend money in quilting. I would rather spend my money on fabric, real high quality fabric, and that's how I spend my money. And that's why I don't starch a bunch, because when you have nice, thick, high quality quilt shop fabric, name brand, like Moda or Robert Kaufman. Free Spirit tends to be a little bit softer, so I do use fabric sizing on fabric, but I do that before I cut it. So sometimes I do use fabric sizing, but I do that if I'm cutting jelly roll strips out of yardage. I typically do not starch or use magic sizing on my jelly roll strips. I typically will press my block with a little bit of magic sizing when it's done and before I quilt it, because that helps with the quilting process. So if you're going to free motion quilt on your domestic machine, you are going to want to spray the entire top with some fabric sizing, let it dry, and then press it with a hot iron. So I never put water and iron together with my fabric. I just find that it distorts things, it can shrink things. So I'd rather spray it, let it dry, and then press it. And then I'm just setting those aside. You can use your hand. Like I said, you can use a clapper. You can use a wooden, I have a wooden pin board. You can lay that on top like this, and it does the same thing as those wooden clappers. If you want to take a little piece of 2x4, sand it smooth, keep it in your sewing room and lay that flat, it works the same as a tailor's clapper. So Jelly Roll Club, one of our goals is budget quilting. So I will teach you lots of ways to quilt on a budget because you don't have to spend $1 million on a million tools. There's no need for that. Quilting was a hobby that started as a way to save money. It grew exponentially in the 30s when people were taking clothing and anything that they could get their hands on and making quilts and blankets and beautiful things. During the Civil War, it was very common for people to have homemade quilts, and it was supposed to be a way to reuse everything that you had. In modern times, we've gotten to the point where sometimes our sewing rooms are just busting with tools that we use one time and then never use again. So one of my goals is to always teach you to use a few basic tools so that you can make lots and lots of blocks. That way you can save all of your money for fabric. And there's plenty of fabric choices out there. All right, so we have 21 people joining us tonight. So tell me who you are if you haven't checked in the chat. We have Lynn, Mary, Julia, we have Chris. Ladies, if you're out there and you're watching, gentlemen too, we have a sit and sew on Zoom. So it's Zoom and sew every other Saturday. So if you ever want to Zoom and sew with us and just chat and goof off, let us know. Usually the link is posted right on the Facebook page. So for the Jelly Roll Club. So if you ever want to Zoom and sew with a bunch of fun ladies, we are it. And gentlemen are welcome too. So if there's some sewing gentlemen out there, you're also welcome. And so we have Valerie from Georgia. Hi, Valerie. All right. Lots of pressing, lots of trimming. How's it going? All pressed, ready to trim to 2.5-inch squares. All of these will be 2.5 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. All right, let me move this out of my way. And I'm going to trim, trim, trim till my heart's content. Let me talk to you about trimming surfaces. The best trimming surfaces or the best cutting surfaces are ones that have a self-healing mat. If your mat is too thick or too hard, it will dull your blade and you will not get crisp cuts. So if you are not using a self-healing mat, it makes it really hard to get super accurate pieces. One of the things that I like to do when I trim, if you notice I have a 2.5-inch ruler. With this having a seam in the middle, it can kind of cause your little ruler to wobble. So one of the things that I did to my ruler is I put these little clear fabric feet. So if you look at this, this comes with these little feet, and they're just like a 1/16 of an inch in thickness. And so what I did is I put them here, 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 and here, not putting them anywhere in the center, so that when I lay my ruler on top, there's absolutely no wobble. And I like that because I don't want my baby ruler to wobble. I also love using a tiny cutting mat like this because I can rotate it. So instead of spending $60, $70, $80 on a big expensive rotating mat, I can just use this little tiny mat and it does the same thing. I can just take and flip my little mat and rotate it in each direction. Like I said, I got this tiny mat from the Dollar Tree for $1. So if you have a friend that lives near a Dollar Tree that can get a hold of one of these for you, beg them to run over there and get one for you because they're great. And so I can rotate the little mat around, check all my sides to make sure that this is accurate. And so you're sitting right above that 2.5 inches to make sure that it's square all the way around, and mine is. So now I'm going to scooch that aside, and all of my little blocks are going to be 2.5 inches. And that has a little wrinkle in there that I don't like. So I'm going to get that little wrinkle out right now. All right. So I'm going to set those aside, and I'm going to trim all of my blocks really, really fast. If you get fuzzy things on your wool mat, you can get them off with a lint roller. They come right off. You see my grungy lint roller? If you get any threads, fuzzies, anything on your wool mat, you simply take your lint roller and everything comes right off of it. And I do clean my little woolly every time that I use it because I don't want stuff sticking to it. It looks gross. I'm kind of persnickety. I think most quilters are. All right, so now I have these, trim them all up. It is 8:54. I think we should be done with this block by 9:30 like the other ones. So let me go ahead and finish trimming. So what kind of quilt projects are you guys working on? If you are able to chat, please let us know in the chat what quilt projects you're working on. I have several quilt projects. Obviously, I'm doing the summer sampler in 2 colorways. I'm doing one in batiks and one in pastels, but I'm also working on a nostalgia quilt project. I'm working on a class that we're going to do in June, which is a postcards with Sweden. And so we're going to have several classes coming up. We have nostalgia that's going to kick off the first week of July with the Jelly Roll Club. That class will take 1 jelly roll and 2 charm packs to complete your top plus your background. And Postcards with Sweden takes a special kit. It's available on Etsy. And I will post the link when I post the class information. Postcards from Sweden will be a Zoom class. So it will be on Zoom. And we can have a maximum of 100 people in our Zoom. All right. So tell me what you're working on. That would be awesome. While we are trimming these up to 2.5 inches square. When you trim 2.5 inches, make sure that that line is right on your seam. And I'd rather trim a little bit off of each side and get my blocks perfectly square. And that way I know that they're all the same size and they're all going to fit together. Patricia's working on a quilt with puppies. Patricia, if you want to join us for Zoom and Sew, we will encourage you and help you finish your quilt top. I'm going to be doing a class on quilting on your domestic machine in April, where I'm going to be quilting a bigger table runner, and I'm also going to be doing a class in May where I'm doing a full-size quilt. And the class in May with the full-size quilt is going to be on Zoom. So if you want that information, you'll have to go to our Jelly Roll Club Facebook page, because that's where we post all of the activities we're doing. But this group is all about helping you and encouraging you. I've made the most wonderful friends through the Jelly Roll Club. I feel like I have friends all over the place. I have friends in Canada. I have friends in California, in the Carolinas, in Louisiana, Michigan. Of course, I'm in Kentucky. And I'd be glad for you to swing by. We can meet for lunch. My favorite place to eat in Georgetown, Kentucky is Galvin's. And they have they have cheese fries with bacon. So they serve it on this giant platter, and they literally serve probably a pound of French fries, and they smother it with cheese, and they serve it with bacon. So if you're in Kentucky, you need to stop at Galvin's near Birdsong Quilting, where I buy a lot of my fabric, and you need to buy yourself an order of cheese bacon fries. Yum. They're my favorite. All right, friends. Keep trimming, trimming, trimming. I'm almost done with mine. Let me know when you are ready to continue. Just let me know when you're ready to continue. And Patty will be more than glad to help you. If you are new to quilting, this is your club. We have a lot of experienced quilters. My friend Lynn is an experienced quilter. We have Anita. We have several people in the club that would be more than glad to look at your projects, give you advice, help you with choosing colors. We do that for each other. We're a support group. So maybe the Jelly Roll Club is not really a quilting club. It's more of a social support for quilters. We also encourage people to be extremely bad while shopping online for fabric. So if you are trying to restrain yourself from buying more fabric, this is not your club. We encourage fabric hoarding. Curating a collection of fabric. It's not fabric hoarding. And that's a separate hobby from quilting. So if anybody says you have too much fabric, do not believe them. You can never have enough fabric when you're quilting. That's just the truth. All right, let me know if you are ready to continue. I'm almost done with all of my trimming here. All right. Yes, COVID really drove a lot of us out of our quilt shops and into our living rooms and sewing rooms and other places. And that's how this channel was born, friends. I got so frustrated because I couldn't see my friends that I decided, with the suggestion of a couple of other friends, that we were just going to take Jelly Roll Club virtual, and that we were going to be Zooming and sewing and doing things on a YouTube channel. So if you notice, this channel just started in January. Our first activity that we did online was a Christmas tree skirt that we did in December. And then the rest is history. Here we are sewing with friends from all over the US, and it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. Okay, ready to go. So let me lay out this block for you. Okay, I'm going to rotate my camera down so you can see. All right, so I have everything trimmed up. And let me show you what I've got. So you should have, before we start sewing, you should have a basket section that looks like this. You should have two 4.5-inch pieces that look like this. I don't know what this is as an extra friend. A 2.5-inch square. I'm going to lay those out there. You should have 2 pieces that look like this for your basket bottom, and you should have a total of 6 of these little friends that will make your eggs. If you have this, then you are ready to begin sewing. Okay, so let's look at our pattern again. Our pattern says that we need to build this half and we need to build this half. Since this half is a little bit easier, let's go ahead and build that first. Make sure that your egg color is facing down. So you're going to want to sew them down, down, and they all go in the same direction. Down like this, down like this. You're going to need a basket piece for that section. It's going to go down, and then this is going to go down. So this is the section that we're looking at right now. You're going to build this section, and then you're going to sew all of these together. And then last, you're going to add that, you're going to sew that to the bottom. So I'm going to go over to my machine and I'm going to start sewing all those pieces because I'm going to chain piece them. And I'm just going to lay this one on top of the other like this so that I don't get confused. And I'm going to put them over on my sewing machine table one at a time. This block does require pinning. Some blocks you don't have to pin and be exact, but this block does require pinning. And when you're not sure what side, so that you don't lose track, I always put a pin on the side like this so that I know I'm sewing on this side. So I'm going to set these over here. And I'm going to lay them over there, mark it with my pin so that I can make sure that I'm sewing on the correct side. I have a 1/4-inch foot on my machine. That's what was causing me issues. Normally I have an open foot, but this time I have a 1/4-inch seam foot because I was making a quilt top for my daughter, which is going to be a class in June, but she requested it, so I was making it for her. Okay. And sometimes a 1/4-inch foot just really helps when you're doing a lot of assembly line sewing. So now I'm going to sew these up I'm going to put my pin cushion over here. Never sew over a pin. You will trash your machine and you'll be really sad. I never, ever sew over pins. Never, ever, ever. This week was exciting at my house. I have a 3.5-year-old granddaughter, and like many toddlers, she's fascinated with things in my sewing room. She got a hold of my scissors. This is the second time that she's grabbed scissors, and she chopped her hair off. And so she had to go get a little pixie cut. She looks cute, but she was pretty traumatized when I told her that she was going to have to get her hair cut off, because she looked like a nightmare from the 80s. She looked like Billy Ray Cyrus. She had a business in the front, party in the back going on, and so she had to have that cut off. And Ella is 3.5. She's going to be 4. And before you know it, she's going to be sewing with me. So Ella Marie is my little granddaughter, and she loves everything fabric related. She's constantly in my sewing room. Okay, so let's look at what we have here. So down here we have these little sections that I have sewn, right? So I have these 3 little sections that I have sewn, and I'm going to put those seams going opposite directions. And the reason I do that is because I want them to nest and I want my points to match. So I have this one down here, and I have to make sure I put them the correct way. Always make sure you're facing them the correct way, right? And so I'm looking at my pattern, so I'm going to have it facing me. So it may be upside down to you if you're looking at it, but it's this row right here, color down, this row color down, this row, and this row. It's easy to get these confused. See how this is now going the wrong way? And so you make sure you get these face down. So I'm going to press these. I'm going to get my iron over here, and I'm going to press those opposite directions. So I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to sew. I'm going to set my seam, and I'm going to sew this with my seam going towards the yellow. And I'm going to set my iron down. And it's just going to sit for a minute. Now this one, I'll lay it the opposite direction. So this one goes the opposite. And I'm going to flip it this way with my seam going that way. So if you notice, the seam goes this way, the seam goes that way. I always press my seams opposite direction because it reduces bulk and it allows your points to match better. So if you notice, you have 1/4 inch right there from the end to the edge. This is your 1/4 inch seam allowance. When I sew and I sew across there, I should not chop that corner. And this one should be the same way. There's 1/4 inch on this side, and that is my seam allowance, so that when I sew that on both ends, I'm not chopping off my points. And now I'm ready. I'm going to take this 3rd one and I'm going to sew it in the opposite direction. So I'm going to lay it down. I always lay my blocks in the direction that I'm going to sew them. And I lay my pattern beside me so that I can visualize it. It's so important to be very systemic when you're quilting and super organized. And that's a hard thing for me because I like to just sew really fast. But some blocks do require you to take your time and pay attention to the direction. And it's easy to get them confused. And next thing you know, then you've got Jack the Ripper, the seam ripper. This one is mine. So I have Jack the Ripper. I try not to use him, but he's my friend. He has a stiletto on the other side. I like the stiletto side. Okay. If you notice, these are now going opposite directions. You see them? So this is going left, right, left. I'm going to take these, again, double check which way they go, lay them down so that they go the correct direction, bottom, bottom, I always talk to myself, and then I'm just going to flip this over and I'm going to put a pin right there. And see those seams? They should go left and right, and then I'm going to put a pin right where that intersection is to make sure that that is what I am matching. So that when I sew this, and you can push it down with your finger, when I sew this, that is going right through that intersection, and that's where I want to land. So if you notice there's a little intersection, and that's where you want to sew that 1/4 inch seam so that you don't lose that point. And then I just rotate my pin downward, and then it's ready to go. And I'm going to take this to the sewing machine. I'm going to try not to stretch it because that's a little bit of a bias. And I'm just going to barely push it down and push it up like this with my fingers. And now I'm ready to sew that 1/4 inch seam. And so that's what makes it accurate, is pressing the right direction, nesting your seams, and trimming those blocks perfectly. And I went back to gray thread so that you can see it. When you feed your fabric through the sewing machine, make sure you're not pulling, tugging, or stretching. You should not be pushing your fabric. It should just, the machine feed dog should be pulling it inside. Should be feeding it through there, and you shouldn't be tugging on your fabric because that causes distortion on these blocks. These blocks are great for beginners because half square triangles are so versatile. Okay, I'm going to show you that bullseye. So if you notice, there's a little crosshair right there. When I sew across and I land my stitching, I'm going to land my stitching just to the outside of that crosshairs right there, because that's what's going to make that perfect point. And so when I open that and I check it, those are nice, perfect points, and they haven't been chopped off. And I like that. I like making sure that my points are not chopped off. So now I'm going to lay this over here. I notice that this seam is kind of bulky. So in order to prevent my seam from being bulky, I'm going to come in here with my stiletto. And this is important to do. If you have a lot of seams, you want to thin that thing. So I'm going to take and I'm going to pull 1 or 2 stitches out of there. Just dig them out of that center. Like this. I'm not really breaking it, but just pulling it aside. You see, I'm still leaving stitching there. And then I can take that and I can reduce the bulk by splitting that seam. And so I can push some of the fabric one way and some of the fabric the other way. And when I do that, it's called swirling that seam. If you notice, I'm opening that little corner up and I can smush it against my wool mat. And what that does is it takes all of that bulk that was in there and it distributes it. And then when you feel it on the other side, there's no bulk there. And so that's an important little trick to learn when you're a new quilter, is to reduce that bulk. And I'm going to lay my iron on there and make it flat so that those seams behave. And then I'm going to sew this piece on top. So always, if you can, open those little seams. Makes that little perfect little point right there, and I like that. I'm going to lay this here. Following my pattern again, I'm going to sew this last row on top, making sure that my birds or my eggs, whatever you want to call these little guys, are going down. And again, I am nesting that seam right there so that I am making sure that I feel it with my finger, and then I'm pushing it, and then I'm giving it a pin. I always regret when I get too fast and I don't sew where I'm supposed to. Make sure you're lining it up with that crosshair, pinning it carefully, and then you're going over to your sewing machine and you're going to sew that 1/4 inch. Does anybody have any questions about filleting their seams open? It's a really good strategy for reducing bulk, especially on pinwheels or 4 patches. Okay, now I'm going to show you something that happens often, and it's not a big deal. So when I was sewing, that block was stretching just a hair. And if you notice, this has a little hangover. I'm going to press this really good, and then I'm going to measure it. This should be 4.5 inches. And if that has gotten just stretched with me sewing, I'm just going to trim that square. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So never be concerned with that because it can happen. This is why we trim. So I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to fillet the seam again. Just going to trim it down. So I just open it with my finger. And I'm going to allow that to lay down the way I want it to. So go in there with my stiletto and just peel it open and reduce that bulk there. So I have one seam going one way, one seam going the other. I'm going to pinch, 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 smush, pinch and smush. Give it a little press, and then I'm going to check that because I want to make sure that my block is accurate. So I'm going to smush and pinch. There we go. I can feel that with my finger. I'm going to lay that flat. I'm trying to flatten this as flat as I can get it. And then I'm trying to make sure that I'm keeping it square. So I'm using my finger to make sure that I have a 90-degree angle and it's not wobbly. And so now it's super flat. So I've got a nice flat block, but it's got this overhang. So I'm going to measure this. And this should be 4.5 inches. So I'm going to check it. And when I lay 4.5 inches on there, there's a little overhang right over here. And so I'm going to check it. And now I'm going to just barely sliver trim that, and I'm going to keep on sewing. I'm going to lay this here. Just going to line that up right here, making sure that I don't chop 1/4 inch off of the top, and I'm just going to give it a little chop, and that's okay because these are kind of stretchy. And so now I'm ready to sew, and it's not perfect, but you know what? That's okay. I've got a little wiggle room in there. All right, so now we have the next section. So the next section is I'm adding this to the bottom. So I'm going to put this 4.5 inch background square pretty side down, and that is 4.5. So look, this bottom is accurate. This one I might need to just shave just a hair off that corner, but I just want to keep this square and I want to keep this straight, and that's my goal. Always check the pressure on your presser foot. If you have too much pressure on your presser foot when you are sewing with a 1/4 inch foot, it can actually distort your block. So I'm not a fan of this particular machine's 1/4 inch foot. The foot that I actually prefer is a little bit flatter. So if you look at my box of feet, the foot that I normally use on this sewing machine is a little bit flatter. Let me see if I can find it in here. Does anybody else have this in their tool room, sewing room? The one that I normally use looks like this and it's flat. But the one that's over there right now has a 1/4 inch guide. So I'm going to be swapping my foot after we finish sewing today. All right. So the bottom, press it. I'm going to press this down. So I'm going to press towards the white like this, that seam. And then I'm going to give it a little press like that. And so half of my block is finished. Now I'm going to sew the rest of the pieces. This is how they go. I need to add a 2.5 inch piece down here. I need to add this 4.5 inch piece right here. And I need to add a 2.5 inch square egg that goes right here. So this is the next row that I'm going to sew. So I'm going to add this one this way and this one this way. And I need to take them over to the machine and I need to sew on either side of that. All right. And for whatever reason, yeah, on either side of that. So let me go over here and sew that really quick. Have you ever been in your sewing room and you lay out a piece and you're sewing along and then all of a sudden you're missing one of your tiny pieces? And you're like, what just happened? It was here. It's like there's a gremlin in your sewing room sometimes that will snatch one of your pieces and you don't know where it goes, right? That happens from time to time in my sewing room. I'm sure that it happens in yours too. So usually the gremlin is me. I'm the gremlin. All right. Now this seam is pressed down, so that means this seam is going to go up. This seam here, I'm going to check it is going up, so that means this seam is going to go down because I want those two pieces to nest. And so I've checked that, and I'm going to press that really quick. And I'm going to make sure that these are both going in. Now I can just take this entire piece, make sure it goes the right way, and I'm going to flip it over on top. And again, I'm going to take those seams, make sure that they are nesting, and I'm going to pin at those intersections. And then I'm going to sew it one more time. And then I'm going to search high and low because I seem to have misplaced one of my tiny half square triangles. I don't know what I did with it. Oh, well. I've got more fabric. I can always sew more. All right, I'm going to take one more. I'm going to pin these here. And this is going down. This here, this is going down, and this is also going down. So when you run into a situation like that, you can simply just pinch it together, or you can push that seam the opposite direction if you really want to. I don't really see a need for that here. And I'm just going to pin it right there and make sure that I sew carefully when I get to that intersection. So I'm just going to pin it at those intersections, and I'm going to go sew. All right, friends, I'm going to open that up. I like how that basket block is looking with that basket weave. And that goes across the way it should. Always check to see which direction you want to press it. Pressing it changes it. When I move it this way, this looks much cleaner. That line goes right through there the way I want. And so I'm going to press it going that direction. So I'm going to take and let my iron just touch that. And then I'm going to flip it over because it's going the way I want it. And I'm going to press by letting my iron rest on there. And then, mis amigos, I lost one of my little squares. I don't know what I did with it that I had, because I had all my pieces, so I'm going to have to cut another one, and that's okay. That happens. This is why we have extra fabric laying around in our sewing space. I'm just going to let that sit there. So apparently when I was doing all this stuff, I lost one of my pieces because I need it here. So this is my last row, and I need a little half square triangle, and I had enough, but it got sucked up by my monster. And if I have enough here, I may try to cut one, but I may not have enough. All right, so this is how you build a single half square triangle. You take this little ruler, and I'm going to show you how to build just one. So I'm going to lay that down here. And I'm going to cut this off at 2.5 inches. And I will probably find that, if I know me, I will probably find that after all this is said and done. So I will take a single square, pretty side to pretty side. Make sure that those are pretty side to pretty side. I will take and remove what's to the outside. So this is my imaginary line right here. I'm going to draw. Just like that. There's my drawn line. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 1/4 inch seam on this ruler, and I'm going to lay it right on that line from corner to corner, and I'm going to cut it off. And now I'm going to stitch just to the right of that line. So instead of stitching directly on the line, I'm going to stitch right to the right, and there's my seam allowance. I'll be right back. And this little square, because I cut it at 2.5 inches square before I started sewing, does not need to be squared up. So because this little guy was already cut from a 2.5 inch square, I don't need to go to the trouble of squaring this guy up. So I can literally just press him and sew away. So if you just need to make just one, that's a great way of doing it. And let's see which direction I want to press this friend. So this is going this way. This is little basket is in there, so I want it to go towards the white. And so I'm making sure that that's going towards the white so that I can nest that seam. And now I'm going to sew this little guy on like this. And I'm going to sew these two on either side. So I'm going to sew this one first, and then sew the other leg on there. And then I will be ready for my border. Remember, friends, that you should check your block in between. Whenever you sew 2 jelly roll strips together, it's 4.5 inches. So when you sew 2 strips together and you measure them and they measure 4.5 inches, then you know that you are doing your job correctly as a quilter and that you have an accurate 1/4 inch seam. If you sew 3 jelly rolls together, that should be 6.5 inches. And if you sew 4 jelly roll strips together in a row, that would be 8.5. So it's 2, 4, 6, 8. Who do we appreciate, right? This one doesn't matter which way it goes because it's not butted up against a seam, but this one is going up. So I want this one to go down towards the white. This one I'm going to go ahead and just put it out. I'm going to give it a little press. And I'm going to put this block together. Yes, I always find my lost piece after I cut another one. And I always buy extra fabric because somehow I do that. It happens to me all the time. I call it the strip monster. I get like a box of strips and I'm cutting away and I have everything laid out. And the next thing you know, I'm like, I thought I had 7 of that. Why do I have 6? And it happens every single time. I always find it after I've already cut, and it's really tragic. But I don't know. Must be some kind of rule. It's like the quilt fairies are trying to send us a message. I don't know what that message might be. Okay, ready to go. Now I'm ready to sew. And look, that one's pretty accurate. So that means that my 1/4 inch foot is doing its job, and these are very accurate 1/4 inch seams. All right. Squaring up, like I said, between each step, squaring up is a great idea. So now that I have this, and I'm going to set that seam over here. I love how this block looks at that little basket fabric. I think it's really darling. This is for my granddaughter. You're going to see I have maybe a little tiny bit of unevenness, and that's okay. The goal is finished, not perfection. If you want to be perfect, then you need to paper piece, because paper piecing is probably one of the most highly accurate ways to get super sharp points. It does involve a ton of starching, and it does involve a lot of cutting and removing paper. But if you ever want to learn how to paper piece, I can show you how. But I think with a little bit of patience and practice, you can get a block that's fairly accurate. Okay, my block is ready for the final square up or check. And so I like to use this, you can use a big ruler, but I have this handy dandy Get Squared ruler. It's one of my friends. I like him because I can center my center in here, and then I can just check to see how accurate this is. And if I lay my block in there, it's really, really accurate. I literally only have, when I lay this on here and I check all of my seams, I just literally have just a tiny sliver off of this side, which is this little hangover. So I'm going to go like this, and I'm just going to give it a tiny little trim off of that edge. And that right there, my friends, tells me that my 1/4 inch is pretty accurate, and I can roll it around and just check it. And so when I look at that and I look at my square and I get it centered, I can see that my block is pretty much right dead on 8.5 inch square. So now I need my sashing. You can leave the sashing off of all of these blocks and then make your decision later. It's up to you. I can choose this green right here with a small scale. I think that I still like that. But I also have a different green that I could use that's a little bit more limey, but I think I like this muted green for this quilt that I'm working on. So I'm just going to cut. Remember, 1 jelly roll strip will border your block exactly. So if you have your strip, you've done this before 3 other times, you know what we're going to do. We're going to take a little sliver off of the end like this and get that selvage off. You're going to cut 2 strips off of here that are 8.5 inches. So I just used my ruler that allows me to measure 8.5 inches, because that block should have been 8.5 inches. So I'm just going to take and line it up and trim 8.5 inches. And then your other sides should measure 12.5. So you can either cut that off on the end right at the thing, or you can go ahead and scooch that down so that it's accurate. And you can cut 12.5 inches. This is a 12.5 inch ruler. So I can just lay my big ruler right on there, and I can cut a little sliver off the end and make sure that these are accurate and ready to go. So I line that up with one of the lines, making sure that's good and straight, and I can cut 12.5 inches And then that leaves me a little scrap that I can save for something. I don't know what I'm going to use that for, but I'm going to use it for something. And so one jelly roll strip for the outside, and I am ready to go. All right, friends, does anybody have any questions about how to build blocks? If I could answer any questions. See if I lay those on there. You're going to sew them across the top and the bottom with a 1/4 inch seam. Let me know if you have any questions. You can drop those in the questions. You can drop those in the chat. If you want to email me, if you want to meet with us in person, or if you want to meet with us online, we are here. The Jelly Roll Club meets in person at Birdsong Quilting in Georgetown, usually the first Saturday of the month, but in April, we are not going to be meeting the first Saturday of the month. We're going to be meeting probably the second Saturday. I need to get confirmation on that. I have to travel to California to visit my father, so I'm not going to be here. So I would be happy to meet you in person if you're local and help you with any of your projects. That's what I do for funsies. My email, for those of you who want to know my email, is ivonne@jellyrollclub.com. So my name is Yvonne, but it's spelled with an I instead of a Y. And it's at jellyrollclub.com. Our website is www.jellyrollclub.com. And our Facebook page is at Jelly Roll Club. So everything matches. Everything has the same name. So please email me any questions. Feel free to send me pictures of your projects. Feel free to send me pictures of anything you're working on and ask questions. Be happy to help you. That's what we do. Here's my block. Press those out. Set my seams. Flip them out. Press to the sashing. Try not to distort your block. I'm not pushing my iron down. I'm just letting the heat do the work. I think sometimes the more you scrub, the more you distort your block. This still has a wrinkle, which I'll get out of there later when I press the whole block. I lay that down, and these are 12.5 inches. That's looking pretty accurate, friends. That makes me happy when my seams are accurate. All right, it is 9:37. You should be pretty close to finishing up your block. All right, friends, I am finishing up I'm going to check my block for square to see if it's all straight. And this is block 4 of the Jelly Roll Club series. Like I said, if you do not like this basket, you don't have to make this basket. And if you want to make an alternate block, by all means, make one of the alternate blocks. You need 16 of these blocks for a lap. Quilt, I will show you how to finish this quilt with lots of settings. So if you have ever seen a BQ quilt, which is a quilt that has extra large blocks on the outside and it has a series of rings, I will show you that setup next time, because I'm going to start setting my blocks in rows. And so next time that you see me, I will be sharing with you how to set this series of blocks into a quilt top, because the goal is not just to have a bunch of orphan blocks in a box. It's for you to have an actual finished quilt. And so that is also part of the series that we're going to be working on. So we're going to. All right. And this machine is loud, so I apologize for that. I may bring my other machine for these classes. All right. So there we have it. My block is finished. I'm going to press it to the outside. My basket didn't get chopped off. That makes me happy. I have a few threads that I can take out later, not a big deal. I will trim those before my block is finished. If I want to, at this point, I could spray my block with a little bit of sizing and then give it one final press. But before I do, I'm going to check to make sure that it is 12.5 inches square. So I have my big ruler. And I'm going to check that it's 12.5 inches square. And when I lay this down, this looks like it's 12.5 inches square. I have a little tiny sliver over here that I'm going to trim off. So I'm going to make sure that this is good and straight. I'm going to trim off the tiniest little sliver over here in the corner. Still keeping it straight. I don't have anything hanging off on that side. I'm going to rotate my entire mat. And I'm going to check my quilt on the other side, lining it up so that it's relatively straight. And I'm not getting anything cattywampus, and making sure that it's lined up on this side. And when I get over here, I just see a tiny sliver of little teeth that I'm going to take off. And that, friends, is a completed block. And so your block should look like this. So this is block 4. It's the basket block. I've made it in 2 colorways. As you can see, I have it in batiks and I have it in pastels. So this is block 4. I hope you had a good time tonight. Please, if you have any questions, you can email me and I will write my email right here on a piece of paper for you so you can see it. So my email is Yvonne, and my name is spelled IVONNE, and it's at Jelly Roll Club, one word, .com, and that's my email. So my email is Yvonne, IVONNE, at jellyrollclub.com, and that's my email. The website is www.jellyrollclub.com, and our Facebook page is at Jelly Roll Club, one word. So let me know if you have any questions. I appreciate you joining me. I will be glad to help you do anything that you need to do quilting related. Join the Jelly Roll Club. We have lots of things going on. Like I said, we have postcards with Sweden in June. We have free motion quilting in April and May. And we have a nostalgia or a Buckeye Beauty in July. And then we also have a Jelly Roll rug that I've yet to schedule because I've got some scheduling things going on in June. So if you want to learn to quilt, if you want to learn to sew, and if you want to have fun, join us on the Jelly Roll Club. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you like what we do on here, share it with your friends. We'd love to have you. Have a great night. Have a great night. Bye-bye, friends.